どうぞ。
うまい。
If you were trapped in a virtual world, you're gonna want two things: this sandwich and this gear from Into the AM. It's a men's fashion line aimed at keeping you comfortable while making you look good. Just in time for fall, their hoodies and their sweats are fantastic additions. Even though you're trapped in a virtual world, you can still be super comfortable at home. Into the AM's fall gear of their sweaters and hoodies are some of the most comfortable things I've ever worn. They're made of premium materials that feel like you're living in a cloud. You can cook, game, and lounge around in these no problem and just look good doing it. Let's be honest, you're all wearing sweats right now anyways. If you want to look good and feel comfortable at the same time, check out Into the AM and use Chef PK at checkout to save yourself 10% off. That's intotheam.com and Chef PK at checkout for 10% off your entire order. To start things off, we're going to be making our own bread, and I'm going to be making focaccia. So you're going to need 413 grams worth of all-purpose flour, followed by 75 grams worth of bread flour. Alternatively, use wheat flour if you want a more tender bread. We also need to measure out about 10 grams worth of salt, and about 413 grams worth of warm water. To that warm water, we're going to add 4.5 grams worth of dry yeast. You want to add this to the warm water immediately so you can get the blooming process going. This needs to sit for about 10 minutes before we use it, but just give it a good forking to get everything incorporated. Let this sit to the side until we're ready to start mixing. Measure out 15 grams worth of olive oil as well. This is going to help flavor our dough. Now with your mixture of choice, I'm just using my KitchenAid. Add your dough hook and slowly start adding in your yeasted water. You don't want to do this all at once because you might just splash it around, but just make sure it goes in a little bit easily. Now you do have to scrape down the sides intermittently, and if you're careful and not like me, go ahead and turn off the machine before you start doing this. Make sure that all of the bottom comes up towards the top so this way the flour gets completely hydrated. We're going to be mixing this for about 8 minutes on a low speed before we add in our salt. Add in your salt after those 8 minutes or so and let this all come together for an additional 8 minutes at a medium speed so that way you start developing some gluten. After those 8 or so minutes, we're going to start adding in our olive oil. This only needs to go for a few minutes to start incorporating the olive oil, and just make sure that you do this very slowly. This way the olive oil doesn't hit one spot and you don't get a big old mess, because let's be honest, that's going to happen. Once your olive oil is incorporated fully and it doesn't look like that shiny boy, we're going to turn this over onto a dry working surface. I want to just introduce some folds into the dough, but we're not really going to be overworking this too much. This will start helping some of that gluten develop even further and also incorporate a little bit of air into the dough without really overworking it. This is going to give it a really nice texture in the end. After about 3 to 4 minutes of working the dough in this manner, we're going to go ahead and add this to a bowl lined with a little bit of olive oil. Now that we have our handy dandy benchy over here, you just want to make sure that you scrape all of the dough off of your cutting board without really rolling this into a bowl. The reason for that is so the gluten has room to rest and relax and stretch out just a little bit. Throw a lid on this and we're going to let this sit out for an hour before placing it in the fridge overnight for about 2 days. Now for my steak of choice. I'm going with New York on this, but use whatever you want. Measure out 4 grams worth of granulated onion, followed by 1 gram worth of dried ginger, then about 3 grams worth of granulated garlic, and for some heat, 1 gram worth of chili flake. Lastly, you're going to need about 10 grams worth of kosher salt to finish seasoning this. Now I'm going to season this in 2 parts. First, take some of the dried seasoning you have and gently rub it down all over your meat, and then take a little bit of olive oil and make it into a slurry with your spices. Now start really rubbing down your meat. This sounds very bad. Please don't repeat this to your parents. Just making sure that it's totally covered. Make sure you get under that meat as well, otherwise you're going to have a bad time. Now I'm going to let this rest in the fridge for 2 days with no covers or anything. Now we have to make the sauce, and for the sauce we're going to be making a soy sauce and yuzu mayo. Take 1 whole egg and a pinch of salt with your immersion blender and start slowly adding in 220 milliliters worth of blended oil. Do this slowly so it starts emulsifying, but you're going to end up with this really beautifully thick mayonnaise. After you're done blending in your oil, add 15 milliliters worth of soy sauce and 15 milliliters worth of yuzu. Give this a quick blend and bring it all together. Once it's nicely blended and all together, go ahead and just give it a quick scrape so there's no weird stuff at the bottom, and then season this after tasting it. Mine needed a little bit of black pepper just to kick it up just a bit, and then place this into your container of choice and let this sit in the fridge overnight so it kind of thickens up just a little bit more once those oils get cold. This is Asana's secret sauce. And 2 days later, we can start finishing this off. You can see after a couple of days how much of this dough has risen and grown, and this is what you really want. Grab yourself a half sheet tray, spray it down, and then drizzle a little bit of olive oil onto that pan. Gently, and I mean gently, remove your dough from the bowl and place it onto your pan. You want to make sure you do this gently so you don't degas the dough. Degassing the dough will leave you with nothing but flatbread, so try to gently stretch out your dough to fill up the pan, and realize that the pan is just too big, so grab a smaller pan, a 9x9 pan and gently slide your dough into that. This will give me a much thicker focaccia, which is going to be great for the sandwich and kind of what I was going for anyways, but just make sure it reaches all the edges. Now wrap this bad boy in saran wrap or plastic wrap and make sure it is totally covered so no air can escape or go in to dry out any of that dough. We're going to let this hang out for about 2.5 hours until it is risen and bubbly and delicious. Now while that dough is hanging out, we're going to go ahead and start roasting off our New York. Since this thing is incredibly cold from being in the fridge, I let it hang out for about half an hour at room temp before throwing it into an oven at 500 degrees for about 15 minutes. This will help develop a little bit of a crust on the New York and allow it to give it this really beautiful texture and color. Now set your thermometer to 140 degrees Fahrenheit or 60 degrees Celsius and bring this to a beautiful medium rare. Now I apologize for this, but you're going to want to bake your dough after 2.5 hours at 500 degrees for about 20 minutes to give it this beautiful GBAT. My camera didn't record me putting it in the oven, so instead I'm going to treat you guys with the much appreciated happy dance. After your happy dance is over, remove the bread immediately from the pan and place this on a cooling rack so that way it doesn't overcook in that pan. This had a beautiful color to it. The crust was amazing. The bottom was a little dark, but it still looked beautiful and the texture was amazing. I also pulled out the steak when it was ready, which I didn't get on film, but I let this rest for about an hour before cutting into it, and here's my uninterrupted reaction.
Oh my god. You can't have it. Oh god.
Now we do have to start slicing some of this steak up for your sandwich, so go ahead and start slicing this up and place it aside so that way... What are you doing? You need this. The thin slices make for a really good sandwich, and use as much steak as you want. I'm going for a decent handful on this, but feel free to just put the whole thing in between bread and just keep snacking on it because that's apparently what you're doing. Now for the focaccia, cut this bad boy in half and marvel at the gloriousness of the center, and then go ahead and cut this into quarters. Each quarter will be enough for one sandwich, so go ahead and take a quarter, cut that guy in half, and get this ready to be sandwichified. Take a generous portion of your yuzu soy sauce mayo and slather it all over the piece of that bottom bread, and then give it the same treatment on that top piece of bread as well. Now for the greens, I'm using some really beautiful arugula because the spiciness is going to be really nice. Hit this with a little bit of yuzu and a little bit of olive oil, season it with black pepper and some salt, and then start layering that beautiful steak on the bottom portion of your bread. Layer this up so it's as even as possible, which makes for a really nice sandwich. Then take all of your arugula and start placing it on top of the steak so those juices fall into it. Remember to continue to eat your greens because you're going to need them after this sandwich. Take a piece of provolone, place this right on top of your greens, and then I'm also using some beautifully cleaned red leaf lettuce. Now top off your sandwich with your second piece of focaccia, and there it is, the absolutely gorgeous, thick boy Asuna sandwich from Sword Art Online. There it is, guys, the Asuna sandwich. Now, this is totally up to interpretation, and I'm glad it is because we get to pick the bread we want to make, we get to pick the steak we want to use, get to pick the way we make the sauce, but we do know that he was really impressed about mayonnaise and soy sauce, so that's why I made that kind of yuzu soy mayo, and this is getting all over my hands. This is making my mouth water. I already know that steak is amazing. I had been snacking on it while I was cutting it, but now we have to try this together. Cheers. How do I get my mouth around this? The steak is beautifully cooked. The bread is tender, but it has a crust on it. You taste some of that yuzu from the actual dressing we use for the arugula. Then you have that really creamy mayo, a little bit of nice like cheese flavor from that provolone. This is a sandwich. Oh my god, oh, that's amazing. It's never too late for a cross section. You guys ready for this? If you want to support the channel directly so I can keep making things like this, check out the links below for Patreon or buy my books. My name is Chef PK, get subscribed, and remember, keep playing with your food. Just watch for the, the future nerve gears we're gonna get. No fried brains, please. No fried brains.